Welcome, Network for New Music audiences. Today, we have Richard Wernick, the eminent composer who is known, amongst other things, for winning a Pulitzer Prize and for his long tenure as a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Richard Wernick.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I wanted to begin with discussing or speaking with you about your experiences with another composer, with Irving Fine. I watched an excellent masterclass you gave with young students about his music. And you spoke about Irving Fine, in particular, the string trio, I believe, you mentioned it was a
Right.
significant breakthrough and a synthesis of Schoenberg and neoclassical Stravinsky's music. And you described it as being sort of the past distilled through a modern mentality. And I wanted to begin with this because I know how much past music has meant to you. And I'm wondering if you could share with us some of your thoughts on that.
I met Irving through a high school music teacher. I was dabbling with music. I was still in high school, and I can't remember the reasons, but I had finished my required coursework at Newton High School, which in those days was considered one of the premier public high schools in the country. And I was always fascinated since I started piano lessons with counterpoint. And I took a counterpoint course in my junior year of high school with this man, and a certain amount of stuff came out, and he encouraged me to take his harmony course the following year, which I did, and then he encouraged me to go on into music professionally, and he wanted me to meet Irving Fine. Irving Fine was not yet at Brandeis. Irving was just making the transition from Harvard to Brandeis, where he had been asked to set up the School of the Creative Arts. And I remember it being a January night, a very stormy January night. And I turned 16 years old, just turned 16 years old. My birthday, as we know from this broadcast, this is in January. And it was my first time out with the family car by myself in a blizzard. And I had to drive the 7 or 8 miles from our house in Newton out to Irving's house in Natick. I never thought I was going to make it. And when I walked in, I mean, there was Irving and Werner and, just two of the kids. And it was the warmest reception I ever had. And I knew within 10 minutes that this was the man I wanted to study with. And when, that's all background to the fact that our relationship started as something somewhat beyond a simple teacher-student relationship. There was a warmth and there was an empathy which continued all the way, to the end of Irving's life. At that point, of course, we're talking about the early 1950s. 1950 exactly. I don't know if people remember the kind of culture war that existed between the neoclassicists, mainly centered around Boston, very, very highly influenced by Stravinsky, almost to the total exclusion of the Second Viennese School. And then on the other side, you had the Princetonians, led by Milton Babbitt, and that whole school, which were becoming more and more what I considered doctrinaire about, serial procedures in music. And during this time was when Irving was writing the trio, the Fantasia, in which he said, look, we can't, he didn't say it in so many words, but in the teaching and the way he spoke, we can't keep doing the same thing. the worst thing that we could be is doctrinaire, that that there are strong principles in neoclassical music. Tonality is not that. The relationships that create tonality, it doesn't have to be the major minor system, it can work in other ways. And he was experimenting, bits and pieces about how to incorporate different techniques, including serial, not quite serial, but 12-tone techniques into his sense of what tonal music was. And to me, the finest product of that from him was the trio. You must be referring to the thing I did at the Library of Congress, right?
Yes.
Yeah. With those kids from Peabody, there's a bunch of teenagers. What a remarkable group they were. But that's what I was trying to show in that whole masterclass, by breaking down the piece, was the coming together, the synthesis of 12-tone music, 12-tone procedures, but being able to use it in such a way that there was a sense of architecture which had arisen from tonal procedures. The way structures are made. We forget, for example, that Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven even, they never used the term sonata form. If you said sonata form to them, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. This was a structure that made sense. And then, as you go through the 19th century, that began to be changed. So you can talk about, Brahms' First Symphony, the first movement is sonata form, but the sonata form gets hardly recognized as sonata form. And the same thing was happening with 12-tone music. For my taste, while the Princeton school became embedded in a kind of doctrinaire, this is the way it must be mindset, along with a lot of neoclassical composers said that this is what it must be, that kind of a mindset. There were those on both sides who were kind of coming into the middle saying, music is not this way. Music is what we make it to be, and there's no reason that you can't fuse the two.
And how did you?
And that was the basis of my compositional education.
And could you explain, how did you navigate those two ideologies, which were so strong? I mean, your creative career has spanned many decades, and at the time you're describing, it was relatively strong. And how did you navigate that at the beginning?
Well, I'll tell you how I was in a way I was pushed into navigating it. Irving was a very, very rational person. He did not have a huge ego at all. And my studying at Brandeis with Irving Fine, Harold Shapiro, Arthur Berger, there were lessons with Copeland, and there were lessons with Lenny Bernstein would come up, but they were not full-time faculty. And I remember a discussion I had with Irving Fine at the end of my junior year, in which he said, our program is a good program, but there is a deficiency. We're not giving our students any background in 12-tone music. Mm-hmm. You have a smattering of Schoenberg, you have a smattering of Berg, you have a smattering of Webern, but not really, we don't really teach enough of the second Viennese school. And so it was Irving who said, I think you should think very hard about going out to Mills College in California for your master's degree and study with Leon Kirchner. Leon Kirchner is a 12-tone composer, not a 12-tone composer, but it comes out of the 12-tone ethos. Yeah. He studied with Schoenberg. He went to the source. His music is very, very highly chromatic, but it also has a tonality of a different kind than the neoclassical music, but it's tonal music. And I thought about it, and the end result was, go out to California and study with Leon Kirchner for a year. I mean, aside from that, it was, it was an all-girls school. Oh boy, and that's what I did. Now, my relationship with Leon was very, very warm. It was not like my relationship with Irving, which became almost like a father-son relationship. But Leon and I were very close, and the irony. I mean, I should write a memoir about all this. It's not about me, but about them. The irony is that these two people, who when I went in to study, were at opposite ends of the spectrum. When I came out, and I was a young professional then, and Leon Kirchner was invited to Harvard, which was 10 minutes from Brandeis, then Irving Fine had and Leon Kirchner became very, very close friends.
It certainly seems
that says something. It really does. It was an era that was solidifying. It wasn't changing. There were two things coming together into what I considered something a lot better.
Yeah, and I think that's, in many ways, your music is positioned as the bridge between those two, and a perfect medium in the mix of techniques. The integrity of the one and the inspiration of the other. And I wanted to speak with you just briefly about sort of the idea of inspiration, because I know you've said before that that really the inspiration doesn't quite exist in the music creation. It's more about the working out of the ideas. Could you explain a little bit more about that, the notion of inspiration to development?
Well, let me first tell you of a question that Stravinsky was asked. And, I don't know whether the story is apocryphal or not. Doesn't make any difference. Supposedly, Stravinsky was approached by someone who said, "Maestro, could you please tell me what inspiration is?" And Stravinsky's answer was, "It's the rubber end of the pencil." And that has always been how I felt, without putting it in those terms. That number one, what you described, the developmental part of music is very, very important to me. And music is ideas, and those ideas are developed, and it's the development of the ideas and the way the development at the smaller level makes architecture at the bigger level, and the way shapes are made, and the way time is used, the manipulation of time. And unless you're a Mozart, I don't think anybody can do this without having a highly developed critical sense. The ability to step back from what you have created and say, it's not good enough, and go back and figure it out again. And Beethoven, we know from Beethoven left all these sketches. We know that Beethoven went through this over and over and over again. I mean, I forget how many beginnings of the second movement of the Eroica Symphony there are in that sketchbook. I forget. Now, I think people may over-exaggerate that and say that Beethoven had this enormous, an enormous struggle, trying to figure out which one and get the opening right. Now, it may have taken them all of 10 minutes, as a matter of fact, just writing these things out and saying, okay, this is the one that's going. I'm not sure there was a great big struggle, but the evidence is there that he did not accept his own first ideas as being the best ideas.
Where and how did you develop your critical ear?
Principally through my teachers, and the ones who were the most important were Irving Fine, Harold Shapiro, to a slightly lesser extent, Arthur Berger. I didn't study with him quite so much, and Leon Kirchner. There was no holding back, and it was not. I never was subject to abusive criticism. Let's put it that way. For many of my teachers, they would say, "Well, I don't know, you know, you're here and you're trying to go there and you got this and, you know, did you really mean that, you know? And then forcing me to kind of go back and say, wait a second, you know, I can do this. I can do this better. Now, whether it came out the way I would really want it, who knows? But I think it came out better than at the beginning.
Now, I'm always, I'm always so amazed at how the control you have over the motivic content of your music. Do you write more than you need and then bring it back? Or?
Oh, yeah. I don't do it intentionally. It's not the idea of saying, okay, I'm going to put out all this material and then go in there and search and see what I've got. But, you know, I finished, for example, I wrote earlier on in this pandemic when it was easy to concentrate and we were all thought it was going to end fairly soon. I wrote a sonatina, piano sonatina. And I forget, I don't have the music in front of me. I forget how many pages it is, but I had at least 3 or 4 times as many pages of sketches as the final project. And then, you know, it's a mystery. You never know how it's going to happen. You get to one point and you make one little inflection, one little small turn, and you say, well, that works. And it not only works for here, but it works all the way back there. And then you go back there and you start to apply that, and that changes everything in between. And those sketches get put aside. I never throw them in the wastebasket. They get put aside. They'll end up in my archive at Penn, so somebody can see the struggle. And that's how it happens. I'll tell you one other thing that I used to do as a teaching tool at Penn. The graduate composition class normally would not exceed 5 or 6 students. And they were people who were, in terms of educational level, as low as, say, seniors who had completed coursework who could take what we call the 500 level course, which meant that seniors who were qualified could take the first semester of a graduate course. And it was the very first course for the incoming graduate master students. And one of those courses was a composition seminar. And often what I would do in that composition seminar is make sure the students had their music paper and a pencil. And I would say, this class is 1 hour long. I am leaving the room. And when I come back, I expect each of you to have put 60 musical ideas on paper in 1 hour. Because musical ideas are easy. They're a dime a dozen. A minute is a long time. You can write 10 musical ideas in a minute. Now, 95% of them are probably lousy, but doesn't make any difference. You get an idea, you just put down some musical thought, some kind of a phrase, some kind of a rhythm, something that happens, and you get a whole bunch of them. Then you start to cull and say, okay, I'm going to take this one from this one. I'm going to take this one. Now the whole class is going to write a piece on this musical idea. And that's how we did it many times. Because the idea is not necessarily the best thing. There's many masterpieces have grown out of rather banal ideas.
Do you still write with paper and pencil?
Absolutely. I write with a pencil. I write with a straight edge. I write with a paper. It's a size paper that George Crumb and I designed ourselves. Oh my God, we're going back 50 years. And I still use that oblong size paper, get a lot of music on it. And I have my eraser. And I don't use the computer at all to compose. I send my music, I make Xerox copies, for protection copies, and then send those out. Have had a wonderful copyist for 30 years in Cleveland, who unfortunately has died, and then I have another equally wonderful copyist in New Jersey. These people are absolutely reliable. They find mistakes, they find little things left out, and I cannot use the computer. Now, I know that when I was teaching, I've been retired a long time now. I've been retired now for what, was it 96, we're talking 24 years. But at the early days of the computer, when students began using computers, the danger I saw was not just that it was a technology, but you could write a piece by, if you wanted to write a scherzo or a very fast music, you could put it in one note at a time. You could play it back and it came zipping back at you. And the impulse so much at the time was where the students would say, oh, that's great, and then move on. Well, it wasn't great. It could have been made a lot better, but I think that at least for me, and since I'm not a computer person, I tend to feel the same way. You can't make it that way with a computer.
When you are working out your ideas and developing them, do you use the piano, or is it internal?
It's mostly internal. I use the piano mainly for two things in the last many years. Number one, obviously, if I'm writing a piano piece, I use the piano, not to compose at, but to make sure that what I'm doing is, even if it's going to be difficult and maybe awkward, at least is manageable, and not going to give the pianist fits where the pianist doesn't need fits. The other thing is that I've just developed, not consciously, but I have developed a technique that I can feel on a piano what a violinist or a cellist would feel on a string instrument. So many times, if I'm writing like the solo cello suites, I will check that these chords can really connect in a meaningful way by going into the piano, by having kind of going from the fingers to my brain, knowing that my fingers on that keyboard, that's where they're going to sit on the instrument, and that's how they're going to move. And that, I will make changes often, to accommodate, depending on the individual piece. So that's mainly what I use the piano for. Now, I'm not saying that other people, use the piano all the time. Stravinsky used the piano all the time. So what? Doesn't make any difference. And other composers don't use the piano. They don't need the piano.
Well, you mentioned the cello suites, and you now have 3 of them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a rather significant contribution to the genre now.
Well, the first 2 were presents. The first 2, Joel Krosnick's daughter was a cellist. Joel Krosnick, of course, is a retired, cellist of the many years with the Juilliard String Quartet, and his daughter Gwen is a cellist, and I've known her since she was a very little girl. And the first cello suite I wrote for her graduation from the prep division at Juilliard. The model for those pieces is not necessarily the Bach cello suites; it's the Bach violin partitas, where and some of those fugues, the way he manages to get the inner voices to be important, and that's something that is important to me. That a musician just doesn't get the top and the bottom, but gets what's in the middle. And it happens. Look, it happens even with the big grown-up people, that the performers, conductors. Often you hear, and it's one of my criticisms of many performers and many ensembles. Often you hear the melody and the bass, and you're not getting much of what's in the inside, and it's the inside that makes the music.
Now, you had mentioned that the Bach sonatas, the violin sonatas, were perhaps an influence on the cello. How would you say what might be the influences in terms of the genre of piano?
Well, that's a much broader thing for me, because I did study piano. I did play piano. I was never enormously good at it, but whereas if I go to another instrument, if I go to the cello or go to a violin or go to the wind instruments or whatever, I'm composing not from my own experience with the instrument. I'm composing with I have to look at models. Not that I didn't look at models when for piano, but not to the same extent. And the models that I looked at were the ones that are there for a very good reason. The Bach pieces and both the violin pieces and the cello pieces. And I think just given the nature of the instruments, that somehow the way one handles inner voices on a violin, because there are so many, it's so much easier to get inside because of the spacing, whereas on a cello, it's not so easy. The idea of writing a fugue for solo cello for me would be much more daunting than writing a contrapuntal piece for violin. So those things come into consideration. Who knows? Maybe I'll live long enough to write another cello suite, and I'll put in a lot of counterpoint. I'm not sure it would work. And then a lot of it depends on who you're writing for. I don't know. I have not made a huge issue about it, but I did make a decision. It goes back about 3 years. That at my age, I was not going to take any more, commissions for unless it were for people I knew. I only wanted to write for people I knew from now on. And this idea came up in a strange way when my, I guess it was my 9th quartet that I wrote for Juilliard. I seem to have written all my odd-numbered quartets for the Juilliard quartet. It was premiered here, and then it was being done a couple of days later down in Delaware, the university. And I remember it was a rainy night. I was driving down the Blue Route, and phone call came in from Joe Lynn, and said the man who runs the concerts at the university would like it if I could say a few words to the audience before the performance. And I had nothing prepared. So I said, okay. I mean, I wasn't talking driving in a storm. My son was driving, so we'll get that. So no, police shouldn't come and arrest me. So I started thinking about what I would say, given the fact this is going to be talking in a half an hour, and I didn't have any notes or anything. So I thought about it. I thought about it while they were playing the quartet Satz of Schubert. And what I did is I went out and I spoke about the fact that one of the things that I could do with this piece, which I really had done, is that instead of clefs at the left side of the music lines, I had faces. So I could see Joe Lynn. I could see Ron Copes. I could see Joe Krosnick. I could see those guys. I really could. And that struck me as that this is what I want to do. So when I write music, I want to see the person's face.
That's very much like Duke Ellington in his charts. He didn't write the names of the instruments. He wrote the names of the.
Yeah, I know. So I didn't know that until later, as a matter of fact. And my 10th quartet, which I wrote last year, I wrote for the Emerson Quartet, and of course they alternate the first violin. So I forget who asked me. Said, "Well, how did you do that with the Emerson Quartet? You don't know who's going to be playing first violin in your piece." So I said, "Well, for me the solution was easy. I wrote 2 first violin parts, which is why the piece is a little different from other pieces, because it really does have 2 violin parts. The first movement has a big fugue, and the subject, the big part, is in the second violin. It says second violin, but they really are 2 two first violinists.
Now, if I could go back to the third sonata, because you and I spoke before about or in the program notes too, there's a discussion about the second movement being kind of or the third movement being together, bringing together of all the ideas. And it's a rather inventive way, a collective way of bringing all the motives and ideas together. And when I asked you about the piano sonata before as a genre, and we were sort of thinking about influences, it reminded me of Harold Bloom, the literary critic, who often discussed that, in late Shakespeare, it's not so much that there's an outside influence on Shakespeare, but Shakespeare begins to influence himself at the end of his career. And I'm wondering if that same can't be applied to you as well, sort of the influence of yourself upon yourself in some of these later pieces, these really personal pieces now.
No, that's an interesting question. I've never thought of it in quite those terms, but sure. And I don't think it's hardly unique to me. I think that most composers, if they live long enough and if they continue working long enough, I don't see how it's possible, unless a composer changes style drastically in midstream, how it cannot help but be self-referential in some way or other. And by self-referential, I don't mean repetitive. I mean, that has happened, and I can talk about pieces that of colleagues and other people that I don't know, but where that happens later in life is that when the ideas begin to disappear to a certain extent, then stuff gets regurgitated. And that's a different process. The self-referential process is different. And what it does is, for me, I look back on those early days of teaching that composition seminar at Penn, where I would ask the students to put down 60 musical ideas in 1 hour and take those ideas. Well, if I take a piece of mine, and I'm more conscious of it now, and there are ideas that are developed in, let's say, the first movement, but the possibilities are infinite to develop an idea. Even any kind of an idea, good idea, a mediocre idea, even a bad idea can be developed and turned into something else in an infinite number of ways. Now, you can't do that in a single movement without getting a mishmash. You've got to be selective. So a lot of stuff gets left out. But then in some of these later pieces that I've written, yes, I go back and I say, okay, I didn't do this the first time around. Now I've got a movement in between. Now it's going to be a different piece, and I can bring back other ideas and integrate them into this other movement and use that material in a different way, which is part of the way I work now. At the beginning of this, and I remember certain events absolutely specifically. I can remember the last time I was in a restaurant and the last people we were with, which was the last week of February. I can remember a cocktail party that was done at the beginning of March for one of my former Israeli students, who's now a very close colleague, who was visiting the United States. And I remember the people who were there, Philip Manival and his wife, and Jim Primarsh and his wife, and people, his former colleagues, students, graduate students at Penn. And that was the last social event that we've had during this whole time. And we remember those markers. And at the time, I mean, for all of us, it appeared, and certainly the way we were getting information, well, okay, this is something serious. We're going to have to hunker down a bit, and then it's all going to go away. And in a couple of weeks, it's going to be fine. And so at the beginning, I was able to work more or less as I was able, you know, to work normally. I did write the sonatina for Jim Primash, and that one, you know, I don't write quickly. I write fairly slowly, but that one went at a normal pace. And since then, I've been working on another string quartet that I would like, you know, the Daedalus one day to play if we all live long enough, and that's been tough. That has been a real struggle because by the time I get into writing the string quartet, we all knew that this was a long, long haul, and I just found concentration, you know, very, very hard. Even that some days just having the will to go down to my studio and work. It's not been easy. You know, it's going. It will get done, and you know, I get solace in a kind of a perverse kind of way. I just got an email, as I told you, from this writer friend in London who's very prolific, who said he sits and looks at the wall all day. So, you know, it's affected lots of us. I know other composers that I keep in touch with who, some of whom don't write anything, and some who just, that's the only thing that keeps them going, is to just keep writing. So we've all reacted in different ways. Mm. And so we wait for the vaccines. I mean, one of the things that makes me envious is all my former Israeli students who are sitting over there, they've all been vaccinated already. They've already had it. We're still sitting around waiting.
Well, let's hope it comes soon, and
let's hope it comes soon.
Be together again and enjoy it, you know, as a group, with an audience, with these wonderful performers who have dedicated themselves to these.
The performers have been sensational.
Well, we're hoping that, you know, 2021 and ushering in with a birthday concert dedicated to you will be a big beginning to what we hope to be a really great year.
Well, we hope. You know, it's very nice.
And I'm grateful for you for taking this time to speak with me today and our audiences.
I'm very glad we were able to do it. Very good. Thank you. And I look forward to the concert.